Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Hey, it is Angie with Connected Parents with Angie. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. So, for today's episode, I want to talk about trauma and talk about how it impacts brain development because I know as a parent, we can't see what's happening inside of our kiddos' heads, but we sure can see the behaviors that come as a result from what our kiddos have experienced. And so, with this episode, I really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper to help you with understanding maybe a little bit better why your child is acting the way that they are. Because here in this podcast, we really focus on strategies, right? I want to help you have really practical tools that you can use to show up differently for your kiddos. But sometimes it helps to understand where in the world these sometimes atrocious behaviors are coming from. So, what we know about early childhood development and the impacts of trauma. Well, actually, let's start in the womb. So, I know that I recently, in a recent episode, talked about, adopting our kiddos when they're really tiny and some of the things that happen. As I've been learning more and more about human design and really wrapping my head around that, it just occurred to me actually today. I was interviewing for someone else's podcast, and it really occurred to me that, we know from a medical standpoint that while our child is in our womb, we know that our hormones are impacting. Our child is experiencing our hormones. We know that our child is hearing our voice, is feeling some of our feelings that we might be having. We know that our child is having an experience from pretty early on after conception. Once their senses are developing, science tells us that our child is having experiences. And so we can't forget that when we are talking about our kiddos who we've adopted even from day one. They've had an experience for hopefully 9 months with their first mom. And like I said, the more that I've been learning and understanding human design, I also think we can't discredit that we each are designed to process, use, absorb energy in different ways. All of us are different. We're all, there are only 5 types in the human design system. There are only 5 types, but then there are so many nuances about how each of us individually processes energy so that we can fulfill our purpose on this planet. And so when we think about that from this mother's perspective, perhaps perhaps our child's first mom really had an open solar plexus, for example, where she was really taking in the emotions of other people around her. And if your child's first mom was experiencing a stressful life situation where she was then also absorbing other people's energy, imagine the impact that that must have on your child. So I just wanted to share that little nugget with you, but let's get back into the science of our child, right? So our child has experienced hormones and senses in the womb, and then they're born. And when our child then experiences trauma early on, while in the womb, after being born, when our child experiences trauma, and trauma can be things from abuse, neglect. It can also be from witnessing domestic violence in their home, experiencing homelessness. Also, like natural disasters can also be really traumatic. The birthing process itself can be traumatic. Time in a NICU, all of these things can really impact our child's trauma response. So let's talk about what that looks like in their brain. Well, we know, science knows that several changes can and do occur in the brains of kiddos when they experience trauma. So one thing that we know first and foremost is that their amygdala, so it's our amygdala is this tiny little structure in our brain, and it is responsible for our fight, flight, and freeze response. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there's this tiny part in our brain that is there to keep us safe. If we are in imminent danger, our amygdala kicks in and essentially shuts off many of the rest of our brain. If we're being chased by a bear, we don't want to waste time thinking through all of the possible ways we can get away from the bear. Our amygdala is designed to fight, to run, or to freeze if that's what it decides is the best solution given the presented problem. It doesn't think logically through what's, you know, weighing possible outcomes. It is a quick responder and it releases hormones into our body. So when a child early on experiences complex trauma, experiences repeated trauma, what ends up happening is that their amygdala ends up firing way more than what would be expected, right? If you think about in our everyday today life, my amygdala doesn't have to kick in very often. Occasionally, while I'm driving, if somebody cuts me off too closely, my amygdala kicks in, and I know that the rest of my brain isn't functioning very well, but my body instantly reacts to my amygdala's message that it sends to me. I don't think about slamming on the brakes. If I had to think about it, I I wouldn't do it fast enough and I would crash. But instead, my amygdala quickly reacts and sends a signal to my body to respond accordingly. So when a child experiences trauma repeatedly, that means that its amygdala is in high alert way more often than it needs to be. And the size of the amygdala in kids who have experienced trauma is actually larger than the average child. Their amygdala grows. It expands because it perceives that it needs to. And if the child is experiencing trauma, it does need to. The problem that happens when the child's amygdala increases in size, it starts responding even when there is no danger. The amygdala then is in this like rapid response mode, releasing stress hormones into the body on a regular basis. And that release of those stress hormones ends up becoming the norm for the child. So what in the world does that mean? Well, that means that we have this child who's in this high alert state all the time. These stress hormones are released into their body all the time, instead of on the rare occasion when it might need them. And so, what that looks like is a child who is hypervigilant, who is not able to then, and we'll talk in a second about the rest of the impact on the brain, but a child who's impulsive, not thinking through decisions, and who has this constant stress hormone circulating through their body, which, as we know medically, can have a huge impact on other structures. Imagine the impact on the heart and our other body structures that are designed to metabolize those things out. When our body is releasing those stress hormones so regularly, it has a huge impact on health, on well-being, and on the natural state that our child is in. We end up seeing a child who is highly stressed. We see a child who is impulsive. Sometimes, though, what's really baffling for us as parents is we have these kids in these high alert states with stress hormones constantly circulating through their body, but to us, these kids look calm. And then these just wild behaviors happen. And to us as parents, it looks like it came out of nowhere. It looks like our child went from 0 to 60. That's often what I'll hear parents say is, my child went from 0 to 60. It came out of nowhere. But the truth is, your child was already at 59 or 58 all the time. They didn't go from 0 to 60. They went from 59 to 60 because they were already there. It's just become their norm. And so it doesn't seem so apparent to us as the parents or the teachers or, whoever's trying to help this child. So we know science shows us, brain scans show us that the amygdala, um, more often than not, is larger and reacting more often in children who have experienced early complex trauma. We also then know, because of that, that the prefrontal cortex of children who've experienced trauma is smaller. It doesn't have as much mass to it. It has it the blood isn't flowing to that prefrontal cortex in in the typical way that it would if that child had not experienced trauma. And so, what does that look like? Well, it looks like a child who can't control their impulses, a child who struggles with emotional regulation. It looks like a child who's struggling to learn, struggling with cognitive skills. Oftentimes, these kiddos will have a slightly lower IQ than their peers because their brain is so busy, the amygdala is so busy reliving trauma, even when it's not happening, that it's not able to give that same amount of attention or blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for that higher level thinking, the thinking that differentiates us as humans from other mammals. Our kids who have experienced early trauma don't have the same access to cognitive functions. And so as parents, this looks like kids who are impulsive. They are struggling with school. They struggle to pay attention. They can be really hyperactive. They're kids who, um, I remember when my son was younger, he was so bright. He's still very, very bright, but I could give him simple instructions, and it was such a challenge for him to follow through with it. And as a parent, it could look as if he was choosing to not listen. As a parent, it could look as if he was being defiant, but that wasn't the case at all. His brain just wasn't able to get the blood flowing to the parts of the brain that he needed to follow through with those types of tasks. His brain was busy in that fight, flight, or freeze mode and wasn't able to follow through with cognitive tasks that he was fully capable of doing, but he just couldn't in the moment. As a parent, man, this can drive you crazy because it feels like your child is being defiant, being belligerent, being disrespectful, being willful. All these things can be perceived by us as parents when we don't understand the impacts that have had on our child's brain. And when we know these things about our kids, when we know the impact that it's had on their brain, and there are other impacts too, but to me, these are the biggies. There's also a lot of talk about the hippocampus as well and how that's really impacted in early trauma. That's where memories are stored. And so, kind of how children process through those as well could be really, really impacted. But when I think about trauma, looking back at my own experiences, helping families now who are raising kids who have experienced trauma, those are the biggies, right? That constant fight, flight, or freeze mode, so that overactive amygdala is so common, but not always so apparent. oftentimes, and I remember having these discussions with teachers, right? And trying to help them understand that I felt so strongly that this was something that my child was experiencing. And I would get a lot of pushback. I would get a lot of like, no, he's choosing to be defiant. And of course, he could be choosing to be defiant. But when we know this about our child's past, we can't ignore it. We can't just decide that, no, 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 I know they've experienced all of these things and that there've been structural changes to their brain, but they're just choosing to be bad kids, right? We can't, that's not fair. It's not fair to our kids who are just trying to fit into this world and do the best that they can. So we do also know that when our kiddos have experienced these things, when these structures of their brain have been impacted, it has a really huge impact on the long term for our kids. We know that this early trauma really impacts their mental health. Like I said, it really impacts their cognitive functioning. It also can have a huge impact on them having satisfying relationships and really understanding how to navigate relationships, how to show up in relationships when their brain has been so wired to be in this fight, flight, or freeze mode all the time. Imagine how that looks when you're trying to be present with a significant other. Imagine how hard it is to be present and try to meet the needs of others when your brain is ready to run at any moment or ready to fight at any moment. Other huge impacts that we know that science tells us about kids who have experienced early trauma is a huge impact on their sense of self-worth. And this is something that I am just on such a mission to help parents to really understand their kids, understand what their brain really looks like. Although we can do some imaging to see in there, but we see evidence of it. And so by really helping parents understand the changes that have happened to their child's brain, they can show up differently to help reverse the things that have happened. We know that we can reverse the changes that have happened to our kids, and it starts by us shifting the way that we show up for them. It starts by us shifting our mindset and really seeing our kids as, lovable humans that it is our job to figure out how to show up differently for them, to let them know that whatever behaviors they're experiencing right now, whatever big feelings they're experiencing right now, we still love them the same no matter what. So that is my mission, is to help you really understand your kiddos better, understand what's impacting why they behave the way that they behave, and then really give you some practical tools so that you can shift the way that you're showing up for them. So I'm going to leave you on this episode with my favorite tip, which is when your kids are acting out, driving you crazy, doing things to really push your buttons, take a step back and ask yourself, what does my child need from me right now? I say this time and time again, but they do not need consequences from you. They do not need you to tell them that they made another mistake. They do not need you to reprimand them or add to their already fragile sense of self-worth. They need you to respond to their needs, and their needs are to feel safe and connected and lovable. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today is don't forget to ask yourself that question. It is so incredibly powerful in the moments when you are feeling like you're about to lose it. Take a step back, ask yourself that question. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode and how that question is really changing things for you. So that's it. Have an amazing day. It's totally up to you to make that decision. Take care. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can So follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.